Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
And this week we are joined by Murph.
Hello.
Hey, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on. So it's been about, let's see, you played in the actual play game that we did a couple months ago. But then about a year ago, we were just talking about this before we got on the air, you came for our panel discussion about running games online, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, yeah, so it's been a year. Year since then.
And
How's that
we're
thing
still
going?
stuck gaming online, unfortunately.
Yeah. So you're running a Pathfinder game?
Yeah, second edition Pathfinder, which I started just about a year ago and have been running. It started out as a every week thing for about 2 hours a week, and then switched to every other week and alternated with one of my players running a 5e game for us.
Oh, that's cool. I don't think I knew about the 5e game. Was it a little bit of whiplash for you going back and forth between those two?
It is a little bit of realignment every week to switch between rule sets, but it helps that I'm running one and playing in the other, so I only have to remember one side of it. Yeah,
so you are now a battle-hardened online game master, I guess. Is there
or at least a survivor?
Yeah, what's your trick that you would tell people? So I think both Andy and I have tried running games online. I've sort of bounced off of it completely, but I know Andy's running Band of Blades, which I think you're playing in too. But is there anything that you would tell people now about it?
Aside from expect to spend a while up front figuring out the audio and video that works best for your group, because I think the Pathfinder game, we spent a full hour trying to cycle between different solutions before we said, let's just do Zoom, and we'll do the game part on Roll20. We'll do the talking and seeing each other on Zoom, and that's what works for us because nothing else worked.
Yeah.
Now, Pathfinder is a game that at least it's certainly built so that it works well with like a really tactical experience. And is that something you've really tried to embrace while running the game online, or have you gone more kind of theater of the mind?
Right. I mean, Pathfinder does very much have the grid layout of things and the very finicky tactical combat system. So we have been doing that just through Roll20. Yeah, I've been running a published campaign, which lets me spend a little bit less time on figuring out what's going to come up over the course of a session, though I am converting it from first edition Pathfinder to second. So it's more time consuming though to get maps trimmed out of PDFs and uploaded, or little mini tokens put together for things. The physical, or not physical, the digital toys part of it takes up a larger part of time than maybe the actual plot or obstacle creation.
I mean, I assume though that it is worth it, that the investment you put into figuring out how to use the tactical combat stuff in Roll20, it pays off though. Is that right?
Yeah, for me it does. I do prefer the games that have more of a visual presence to the actual gameplay, where you can see what's happening over the mostly spoken theater of the mind approach. Having the virtual tabletop, for me personally, makes playing online much more enjoyable than an all audio experience would be. I have done some play-by-post, just text gaming in the past, which is a very different experience, and that works out okay too.
With your Pathfinder game, are you, as soon as vaccinations and the state of the pandemic allows, are you going to switch it into a face-to-face game, or are you gonna keep rolling online?
I haven't figured that out yet. The online experience definitely has its positives and negatives. All else being equal, I would prefer to be in the room talking to my players in person and hanging out with them because they're all my friends. But the online play certainly lets us all roll straight from putting the kids to bed to being at the computer playing 5 minutes later, and not have half the table rolling in over a 20-minute period as people make their way from their houses. And one of my players at that in that game is actually a 9-year-old, the son of one of my other players. So I don't think he would be able to play at all if we were waiting until everybody else's kids went to bed, and
Oh
then they
yeah.
had to like come over to my house and be there for a game and then go home again. So it does a little bit facilitate people's like logistical participation, even if it's maybe not the same quality of in person presence.
Yeah, I keep wondering about that because I'm playing in a game right now, and I think the only reason I'm able to make it so often is because it's online right now. You know, I have a 10-month-old at home, and so just bedtime is fuzzy when you have a small baby like that. Yeah, so I mean, like we'll figure it out. We'll play in person when we can, but it is the logistics part of it is easier in some respects. Yeah, no, I think I will miss that. Do you think that you might even stick with the virtual tabletop when you go back in person? Would you be that sort of guy that that gets a big TV and puts it down on the table?
Probably not. Like I do like the tactile, minis and dice, and like I still use physical dice even when I'm playing on the virtual tabletop most of the time, just because like it's the multi-sensory experience there. Maybe we'll move to in person, but it'll probably mean not being able to make it work every single week like we have been doing. So maybe longer sessions less frequently on a afternoon or something.
Well, that's great. I'm really glad that. I mean, that's a real success story. I mean, a whole year is a really respectable amount of time to keep a campaign going. Do you have a sense? If I recall, are you running Reign of Winter?
Yeah, that's right.
Or kind of a converted version of it. Without going into spoilery details, are you like halfway through the campaign? Are you coming up on the end?
So the Paizo published adventure paths are like 6 books long, and we just moved from the second book to the third.
Oh wow!
A couple sessions ago. So we are, as far as page count, a third of the way through the published material.
Wow, that's great.
But I do a fair amount of editing and leaving things out if they just seem like they're ways to take up time or grind for experience points.
Well, and you must be expanding it or letting the players expand it a little bit if you're meeting weekly or bi-weekly. You must be expanding the story somewhat beyond just the print modules, which aren't that long, I think, right? So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, I try to let them have some room to play around and get themselves lost and not just follow the linear path. I've considered it a success when one of my players said, for a while there I didn't know what we were supposed to be doing. It's like that's great, because the adventure very much knew what you were supposed to be doing, and you figured out something that was different but still sort of moved the flow of things along. So
that's
their
super
victory.
great.
So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have you back on in a year to tell us, if when you hit the 2/3 point through the campaign, how it's still going.
Yeah. So we should roll on the table pretty soon. But I guess before we do that, I wanted to ask: has anybody been watching anything good lately? So before we got on the air, we were talking. And I admitted that I have not read anything lately at all. Again, see 10-month-old and pandemic and all that. Mm-hmm. But I have watched some TV and movies and stuff. But yeah, so I just wondered, is there anything good that you've been watching that you're drawing inspiration on for your games?
This isn't a show, but I have been.
You can talk about books if you're actually reading. So.
Oh, I'm going to get even less mature than that. But okay. So I periodically get back into the video game Overwatch.
Ooh, yeah.
And my brain has been really spinning because I've been trying to pay attention. So Overwatch is like a shooter where you and another team fight against each other on a map, and you're often trying to capture a couple of points on the map from the other team. And I've been drawing some tabletop inspiration from it by just thinking about how those levels are designed. I was just realizing as I've been playing how good those maps are at channeling you to the handful of places on the map that are where the exciting stuff is going to happen.
Oh, cool.
So like those maps are built to get you and the other teams into the same space. And if you think, I've played a lot of like kind of shooters like that, and if you think about like a bad map is one that could be really cool and really intricate or really realistic, but it's too intricate or too realistic, and you find yourself lost on the map or taking a wrong turn. Whereas with Overwatch, whichever way you go, you will just be dumped out within 30 seconds. You will be dumped out into a room where everybody is fighting.
Yeah.
And it just made me think like about tabletop dungeons. What can you do when designing like a dungeon or dungeon-like environment that gives people a little bit of freedom, to explore and go their own way, but also will bring them to the exciting parts, pretty reliably, if that makes sense. So
yeah, that's really cool.
I remember, I think Chris brought up laser tag on the maze episode maybe, and talking about how like being in a laser tag space with the lights on, it turns out it's actually a really small overall physical space, but kind of designed in a way to make it easy to separate people and obscure them from each other, so that there's a lot of like maneuvering and wandering around to do. So it sounds like the Overwatch map experience is a little bit the opposite, where it's big but it pushes everybody together.
Yeah, it's a reminder, and there's been a little bit of discussion. I don't know if you guys have been watching Kyle Latino's videos on map drawing, and it's just all of this stuff has really got me thinking about the power of just a simple map to direct players. I mean, the incredible impact that a map, well designed or poorly designed, is going to have on the player's experience moving through an environment. It's a real skill to do a dungeon layout that is really good, I think. So anyway, all right, I'll stop babbling about that and turn it over. Murph, what have you been reading, playing, watching, etc.?
Reading wise, I just picked up Gideon the Ninth, which I think Kyle had mentioned. They're on the show or on Discord at some point.
Yeah, this is like a Kyle episode, except he's not on the show, but he's here.
He haunts us.
There's an empty chair here with Kyle.
So I'm only the first chapter or two in, but it's sort of necromancer space opera sort of deal. I think he had mentioned Elric. I'm getting some Dune feel from it, at least the first couple chapters so far. And then also just relying on the podcast network for all of my content. Andy, I think you'd maybe mentioned The Old Guard, the movie, in your...
it wasn't me, but yeah, I know someone on the channel mentioned The Old Guard. Yeah, did you get around to watching that?
So yeah, I did just watch that after I'd listened to that episode or seen it mentioned, and thought that was really good. So, in the context of like, how do you tell a story that spans multiple generations? This being at least like a snapshot in time for that, and how does it affect these different characters in their approach to each other in the world? It's pretty interesting.
I have two recommendations, one light and one heavy. So the light one we'll start with is the DuckTales reboot. So the for kids of a certain, for adults now, I guess, of a certain age, like DuckTales, like you can just start singing the theme song in your head. But a couple years ago they did a reboot, and it is way better than it needs to be. It's just incredible. Like, they've got a lot of great voice actors. I think David Tennant is actually Scrooge McDuck. But each episode of that is just like a really tightly done adventure story, and like they're upfront about it too. And they're almost like Call of Cthulhu campaigns. There's usually an element of the supernatural to it. They're going inside of a dungeon, or a warehouse, or something like that, and finding a grand mystery or a relic and bringing it back. But it's really good. Yeah. So if you have kids, you might want to watch it. I might even recommend it for adults who like cartoons. Like we actually, my wife and I have enjoyed it quite a bit, watching it with our daughter. So that one's pretty good. If you just want like kind of a light adventure. And then the movie that I watched recently that I've just been thinking about constantly is Uncut Gems. So this is the heavy recommendation. I don't know if I'd recommend this movie to anyone. It's a difficult watch, but it's very incredibly well done. Without giving away too much, it tells the story of a man who's addicted to gambling. And I've been thinking a lot about it in terms of like player motivation and like enemy and monster motivations too. the main character in that movie is just a fascinating individual, but he keeps on making these self-destructive decisions that like don't make sense until you run it through the filter of like, oh, he's addicted, right? Like he needs these things to keep happening. Yeah, but it was really good. It was very effective, and like I said, I've been thinking about it for days days ever since watching it.
All right, yeah, well, thanks. That's some good couple of recommendations there, guys. Thank you. That's awesome.
All right, well, let's roll, Murph. So if you want to grab a D10, so we're going to roll on our table of topics. I'm going to do like the whole spiel. It's been a little bit since I've done this. So we have this table of topics that we roll on. And every week, Andy or I or our guest rolls on the table of topics, and that picks our topic, and we'll talk about this topic for, 10 or 15 minutes or so. So if you want to get that D10 ready and roll it, let me know what you get.
All right. That's a 7.
7. The topic we'll be discussing is how do you start a new campaign, which is, I think, going to be applicable for me pretty soon. But
especially since you just talked last time about the campaigns that you're going to be running.
Exactly. Yeah.
You start a campaign by just getting the backbone to actually the courage to do it.
Yeah.
By announcing it to the world, and then they make you do it.
Speaking of last week's episode, I almost mentioned this earlier, but I think we got more feedback about last week's episode, which talked about campaigns that you want to run but haven't run yet for whatever reason. We got more feedback about that topic than we've gotten about most any other topic I can remember recently. For some reason, that topic just really seemed to strike a lot of people.
I think it's it's that thing that, I think every GM has it in the back of their head. Yeah, they're thinking about. Every GM is sort of always thinking about like the 10 campaigns that they want to run at any moment, right? And like how that would go. And then there's the ones that are like, oh, it's just never going to happen, right? Yeah, so like I think even in that discussion, last week we started thinking about like how you'd start something like that and how you get people like on board with it as well. I'll start trying to answer this question a little bit, and then I'll stop and you can jump in and give me a better answer. But like for me, starting a new campaign like always starts with the players. Right, so like getting the players and stuff together, but then after that, the thing that I've done that has given me the greatest amount of success is sitting down one-on-one with players and really doing a session 0 with each individual to figure out what their character is and answer any basic questions. Every time I've skipped that, it's been rocky, to say the least. Getting people up to speed, or you end up trying to do it at the table all at the same time, and people are distracted, and there's 10 other things happening at the same time. And I think it does people a little bit of a disservice when you don't do that beforehand with a campaign. Again, what I found, because they do have questions, but there isn't a good time for them to ask them like that. And so then, you're trying to figure it out like as you're role playing, which can work a little bit if you're more experienced, but if you're a brand new player, which is most of the people that I play with, that can be extremely hard. So.
Now, Chris, you said that your campaign starts with the players. So can we dig into that a little bit? Because one question I have for both of you guys is, when you start a campaign, does it start with you coming up with an idea for something you're like excited and enthused about running and pitching it to people and getting their feedback, maybe adapting your premise a little bit, but more or less recruiting people to join the game you want to run? Or does it start with, you going to the players and saying, let's play a game. What do you guys want to play? Or, there's probably other points in between on the spectrum between those 2 points. So, Chris, you said it starts with the players. So can you talk a little bit about what that means? And then how would you answer my question that I just posed?
Let me start with the question you posed. So for me, like, it's picking the game or the system or like the campaign that I want to do. And I try to not get too involved in over planning that, although I fail at that every time too. Like even if I'm just doing one shots and stuff. But like, so getting that sort of general idea together and then using that to pitch to people like, hey, do you want to play this game? With the knowledge of, at least for me, like knowing that if I get people to say yes, I can figure it out after that, right? Like that's okay. Like I don't need to have the whole thing prepped before I say like, hey, we're going to run this game and it's going to go exactly like this. It's fine to just have the general idea and get people together.
Murph, how would you answer that? And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you started that Pathfinder campaign.
So I would say it's a mix of the like getting the players together and seeing what they want to do and having that cool idea that I want. Like Chris said, you have the GM with the 10 ideas floating around, and when I want to start playing something, I will usually like grab an email list of like 5 or 6 of my crew that I think would be interested in a couple of these ideas and say, okay, here's 3 things we could do, and give a little pitch, like paragraph for each of them, and say, well, like, what sounds interesting, and then kind of go from there. And generally try to give an idea of like, would this be something that would be like 3 or 4 sessions, or would this be something that could be like an ongoing year or so if we end up doing it that way? I am fortunate to have a number of players who also enjoy the like year-long or so campaigns with me, so that's cool. I think this time around with the Pathfinder game, I had said, okay, here's this adventure path, which was not the Reign of Winter one. Who's interested in playing? And got 4 takers and said, okay, well, let's like get online and talk about it, and talk about some characters. So did a kind of a session 0 all as a group, not as one-on-one, just that people could like see what each other were doing and ask questions together. We did end up, like after the first couple sessions, shifting from the adventure path that I had started with to Reign of Winter. And that was largely because I had not originally expected the 9-year-old to be a player. They just showed up, and I said, well, that's cool, you can stay, but what we were going to play is not 9-year-old appropriate, so let's do this other one instead that I'm also interested in. So
nice.
Was able to segue, and it worked out okay. So.
Yeah.
Chris, do you so what Murph just described sounds a lot like how I approach it. I'm usually in the position of having too many things I want to run. So in my ideal scenario, I would pitch, like Murph described, several ideas and let the players say which one they're most excited about. Chris, do you do that, or do you typically just have like one campaign you want to run at a time?
If I wasn't thinking hard about this, I would say, oh yeah, I pitch a number of ideas. But no, I usually have a pretty strong idea for like what I want to do. It might be a control issue, but it's like, like I think there's usually like there's something I want to accomplish, whether that's just an emotion or a story, a particular story. Yeah, so like in thinking about like the games that I want to run, once we can run stuff in person, like I have a couple that I want to do, but I have like different people in mind for them, if that makes sense, right? Like, so I don't have like hey, these 5 people we're always going to play together, and we're always going to play D&D. It's like, yeah, I have a couple things that I want to try, and I know that there's certain people that are going to like that better or worse.
Do you guys, when you guys think about the campaign you want to start, do you usually start with like kind of a story that you want to like to tell or to share with the players, or is it like curiosity, like there's an interesting game system, I just want to I want to try it out, like could it be any of those things? Like what typically motivates you to be like, I want to run this, let's get something going?
I mean, for me it depends from time to time. Sometimes it'll be like, hey, there's this published Pathfinder thing that I'm interested in, let me pull together my group of people who like the crunchy tactical long-term gaming and see if they want to do that. Sometimes it's, hey, I want to try out this system over a couple of sessions, let me grab some people for that. Sometimes it's, hey, I have this premise for the start of something, let's play and see where it goes. Whichever of those 10 ideas is top of mind and wants to get out, and how does that translate into a particular ask or invitation to the players.
When I was starting up the Band of Blades game, which Murph is a player in my Band of Blades game, it was a little bit of a new experience for me. I find the kind of Blades rule set pretty interesting, so I was interested in trying out a game where we invest ourselves in those game mechanics. And I found the Band of Blades setting, pretty interesting. But for this one, it was an experience. I wanted to see if we could evoke it in the context of a role-playing game. The experience of like being relentlessly pressured, a story that is about always having to retreat and fall back and make tough choices about how long you'll stay in an area before you retreat. I was interested. I almost could have taken any game or any setting that let me play with those. So in this case, it was like, I wonder if we can evoke this feeling in a role-playing game.
Did you pitch it that way too? Were you like, this is what I want to accomplish, or did you just secretly just tell everybody like, hey, we're gonna play Band of Blades, but you had it in the back of your head?
I don't think I articulated. Maybe Murph remembers better than me. My memory goes back about 3 weeks, and then it's just nothing. But I don't think I articulated it quite that clearly. But we did talk about in the early days of the campaign, or maybe a little before the campaign, about that feel. And I did say, I want that feel of like the Battlestar Galactica, like always pressured, always on the run type of feel. So there was some discussion that was centered. I don't think anyone is like super before the campaign was super invested in like, oh, I really want to explore the Band of Blades world. Yeah, it's an interesting world, like nothing wrong with it. But I did get that other people were shared an interest in like evoking that particular type of story in some context, and Band of Blades happens to be tailor made to do that, so it made sense.
Right, it's the game that's very tightly focused in the downtime campaign side of things on that feeling of pressure and running out of supplies, and do you pause here to try to scrounge up more supplies, or do you press on to try to stay ahead of the horde behind you? And that's the conversation that's going on between sessions in the group's chat. So it
sounds like Oregon Trail, that, like you're just series of bad decisions.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think it took us several sessions before I was having that feeling I wanted to experience, and I think the last session, for me personally, we hit it. And when we were done with that last session, I was like, we're going in the right direction. We are starting to create that feeling in this game. But I will say, I was misfiring a little as a GM for a couple of sessions, I felt. So yeah, anyway, I don't want to go too far down the Band of Blades.
Let's actually pull back. So I'm fascinated by this because it sounds like is this the first time that you've really started a campaign in this way with an intent of trying to evoke a sense? Because I would say, I guess, I played in your Alien game, and that definitely felt like we all wanted to play an Alien movie.
Yeah.
Right. And like that's at least I was playing my character as a character within an Alien movie, and so I had a lot of fun with that, and that's the sense that I got from like what you wanted to do with that game, at least.
I mean, I don't mean to keep harping on the Band of Blades, but this was one of the first times where I did think of starting a campaign based on that. Like, what's something I haven't experienced in a role-playing game before, and what's a game system that could empower it. I think with Alien and other games I run, mostly it just boils down to like either these game mechanics look very fun, or the setting material is something we all love, so let's just spend some time in it. That's when I pitch D&D, it's because D&D is fun and the players think D&D is fun, and I think I usually do not think much far beyond like what would me and this particular group of players find just really entertaining to play. I've been talking for quite a while, so let me
No, we're gonna keep on peppering questions at you. We gotta get to the bottom of this one. Yeah. Murph, have you ever done anything like that before, like where you really want to evoke like an emotion with a game or a sense?
Yeah, I suppose when I mentioned sometimes I start from a premise, like my last sort of homebrew open-ended campaign was just taking one line out of a Forgotten Realms source book as to like some historical event and saying, okay, what happens as the ripple effect of that event? So opened the actual action of the campaign with like the town being destroyed and invaded, and things are collapsing and the earth is falling in on itself, and then the players have to work backwards to figure out like what is going on and how do we all like not immediately die while figuring out what it is that that we're up against. Not necessarily an emotion so much as like I know how this starts and I know some of the actors behind it,
Hmm.
and it's kind of the like Blades in the Dark style. If you have these factions, pit them together and see what happens. Um, but then depending on what the players actually find interesting in that initial scene, I'll figure out where it goes from there. Just keeping in mind this pressure between these two factions.
Thinking about when you've decided, what to run, you've gotten the player agreement from players. Chris, you mentioned session zero.
Hmm.
Is that something we all start our campaigns with, a session zero? And by that, I guess, let me define that real quick. I think of a session zero as sort of a pre-campaign, like, kind of meetup where you do a combination of maybe a rules review, help people, build their characters or answer questions, and maybe do a few preliminary scenes to queue up the campaign that will
Hmm.
then start in earnest at the next session. Maybe that's not what you guys do with your session zeros, but do you guys do session zeros? And what is the goal you are trying to achieve with a session zero if you do one?
The goal, when I've done them, is to go over just like mechanics questions, right? Just like make sure everybody understands how the dice work. If they have any questions about them, we can answer them. But for me, the really nice thing about that is to sit down and get some one-on-one time with a player and like really walk through backstory and stuff like that. I don't do well if someone hands me like a 3-page backstory and their character sheet. Like, it's not going to stick with me. But if we're going to have a conversation about it, like that'll stick a little bit better for me. Because I think you can also read a little bit more of what the interesting parts about their character are to them too when you're talking about it. Yeah, like I'm just thinking about one player I had who, like, we just went back and forth about like the character's last name for a while. Like it just was like really important to get that right. Yeah, like I mean, stuff like that just won't come out if they just hand you the character sheet.
Murph, do you do session zeros?
Yeah, I think it sounds like you and I probably do about the same of like going over like what this campaign concept is, sort of orientation to the rules and the environment, putting together characters, and either saying, okay, that's great, we'll go from there, or else just doing like a short 20-30 minute introductory session at the end of the session zero. And I'll say one thing I would like to do more of probably in the future is some of the intentional, like setting up of bonds either between players, the way that like a Dungeon World or Apocalypse World has explicitly written in, or like the 13th Age character relationships to sort of major actors in the world, the icon relationships,
Mm-hmm.
um, to maybe linger a little bit more on those pieces of things, um,
Mm-hmm.
especially the next time I do a more open-ended campaign where I'm looking to the characters or the players um, to pick direction a little bit more.
Is there a? I'm going to ask like a totally different question if that's okay. But the thing that I've been thinking about as we're talking is like, okay, so how do you start a new campaign? We can discuss a little bit about like what we've done in the past, but I'm really wondering like what would be the ideal for you for starting a campaign? So like throw aside like everything. Like would your ideal for a new campaign just be like we just hit the ground running, everybody's got everything set up and we're just like going, day one, or do you like doing the session zero? Do you like having to kind of pitch things and set the premise and those sorts of things?
Yeah, good question.
I mean, I think that like having the chance to talk through it as a group and make sure everybody's on the same page and has a chance to figure out like how do these rules work and how do I use them to create a character that I want to play in this story is pretty important. Especially like I was just thinking a minute ago, like the last 5 times maybe that I've started a new campaign or one shot, it's been systems that were, if not new to me, then at least new to everybody else who was playing. So
Hmm.
um, just sort of stumbling through that initial discussion of like what are the assumptions that are baked into this rule set and what do those mean about the way that we think about this game is pretty
Mm-hmm.
important. I think having that conversation at the meta level of what are we trying to achieve here is a helpful exercise at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, it's like you would say that you like doing that, you know. Like, so even if even if you're like pretty sure everybody's on the same page, you still would like to do that.
I'd say yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and that wasn't like a judgment of you.
Yeah.
Like that was, I'm just curious about it. I think I would also want to have that conversation. What about you, Andy? Do you have anything? Like what's your ideal brand new campaign start?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess my ideal campaign start is like I pitch a campaign, get kind of player agreement, and then everyone takes a couple of weeks and everyone reads or skims the rules. Everyone at least takes a preliminary crack at like building out a character or something like that. Honestly, I like the rule zero. Or, I mean, sorry, not rule zero. The session zero for me wouldn't be as necessary if everybody is coming to the table with like a thorough understanding of the rule system and has built characters that clearly fit within the general theme of the campaign. I would be happy probably just jumping right in. For me, session zeros, I think there's a lot of value in them, but for me, they mostly wind up being like kind of teaching people that maybe aren't as super, who for whom the game rules are new or who the setting is something very different than they're used to. So I don't know. I guess in an ideal thing, we'd all agree on something. We'd all kind of do our homework, and then we'd jump right into the deep end of the pool. In practice, though, I certainly, when I say ideal, I definitely don't mind, though, when it doesn't happen that way, because that is a different kind of fun, right? When where you are learning or teaching, along with the players and figuring out what you want to do with the rule system. But I don't know. I guess if I could skip some of that, I probably would go ahead and do so. But
yeah, I think the shorter I anticipate a campaign being, the less appealing an in-depth or formal session zero becomes. Like if it's a one shot, then there's only the one night to play, so hand everybody a pre-generated character and get moving and explain as it goes along. Whereas if I am doing something that I anticipate possibly lasting for dozens of sessions, then taking the time up front to do the session zero seems like a worthwhile and relatively small investment.
Yeah, for sure. Because you can have a year's worth of impact based on what that conversation is.
This question used the word campaign, but I think we've all been assuming that might mean a one shot or a short campaign or something like that. But I'm just curious when you actually start a campaign, as you all meet at 8:00 and you start rolling dice. I'm curious, how do you guys typically launch your campaigns, in the sense, like, I realize that the answer to this will depend a lot on the nature of the campaign you're running, but do you tend to start things in media res, I guess is, I think, the term for it, where stuff is already well underway and the players are already in the thick of things? Or do you, if you have the option, do you prefer that, like, kind of start slow and build up and let the characters find their way into the meat of the campaign rather than starting them in the campaign? I'll share an example of something where that was kind of a concern for me. Last year when I did run the Alien game, one of my GMing regrets was that I didn't start everybody in the thick of it. Like I started them way at the beginning, with their showing up to get their mission orders. And it honestly was like an hour or two before the movie felt like it started. So that was like a situation where if I could go back in time, I would have said, just forget this 2 hours of briefings and talking to your supervisor and getting your orders. Here you are, here you are in the first action scene. So I'm just curious, do you guys have like a go-to way that you approach that, or does it totally depend on the campaign?
Yeah, I never want to have a situation in my game where like people who don't know each other are like wandering around a town until I can find a way for them to meet up and
totally.
like get to know each other. Yeah, so for me, it's always like I'll just say up front, you know each other and you like each other enough to be hanging out with each other. And if that's not going to work, then you need to pick a different character. That's not the right character for this. But yeah, it's like, as always, like you were already on the road. You were already heading there, or my other favorite go-to is like, you're in prison. What did you do? Like, why are you in prison?
Murph, do you have any?
I also don't want to spend that like long drawn out period of actually getting to the game. And I think that is one thing that can be done in the session 0 is to set the expectations of like, yes, you're all together. Let's figure out why you work together. Let's figure out who you're working for or why you're headed towards whatever that point of interest is. But then like when the game starts, like you are standing at the front door of the dungeon.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're all at the town festival, and what would your character be doing at the festival? Like, what are they interested in? And maybe there's 5 or 10 minutes of just like setting the scene and figuring out a little bit of characterization, but then the action starts and something happens, and the town gets destroyed or whatever. So not necessarily starting with guns blazing, but getting there pretty quickly.
Have either of you guys ever actually started with guns blazing? Like the alien just burst through the door and it's coming right at you. Everybody roll initiative. Has anyone ever taken it quite to that extreme?
No, I want to though so badly.
Have.
Like, as we're talking about this. Just fair warning to anyone who plays with me the next time I run a game. That's how we're starting. There was I just want to call it like, so Matt Wilson did this trick in that we're doing like kind of a short Numenera campaign where he gave us like a scene that we're building towards. So it's just like, this is like a flash forward, right? Like, here's a little like cinematic scene. Like, we are all in coffins being like sent through a portal with a bunch of fire. It's like that's where we started with this future event and everything, and then we came back. So like, we're all like wondering when that's going to happen, and like we know that it's going to happen. Too. But I really like that too. It's just an effective like, hey, like this is a story beat that we're gonna hit. Like, and we're gonna hit it, and then let's jump back and
that is a really interesting way to do it. There's another style of telling a story that I always enjoy the way that like James Bond movies start, because they always start with like a short, really exciting action scene that is usually only like marginally related to the plot of like the movie, and it's there just to like let you right off the bat like indulge in. I mean, this is why you're here. You want to see James Bond, parachuting off of a whatever, and it's short. It's really exciting, and after that action scene is done, there's a sense that like we kind of got that out of our system, and then the plot usually settles down, and then it reverts to a more normal movie plot where there's like a build up and they make a plan, and and it follows that more stretched out pacing. But I've wondered from time to time if you could start off like a long campaign with like a really intense sequence like that, then like pause and say, okay, now we've done that. Now let's kind of meander our way into the main story.
Yeah, I could see that being a good like session 0.5 sort of deal, where it's like it happens 3 months before the primary campaign, and you're saying, okay, this is how those characters got together. We're going to start that in media res, and then maybe after we do that, we figure out like how did they get in that situation, individually or as a group. And now that they've been through that, they're obviously working together, and they've helped each other survive. So I mean that could also be a way to sort of sneak in the rules tutorial before you get to the main.
Oh, totally.
Whatever you want to do is like, okay, we're just doing this now, and we're intending for it to be a little bit disconnected and off. So I like the idea of the James Bond opening.
It's like you're not even rolling for initiative. You're doing a dexterity check right away. Like you're falling off of a cliff.
I mean, you're parachuting. You're in the air. Your parachute just failed to open. What are you doing? Not to harp on that specific thing too much, but one thing that with big campaigns that I always find a little frustrating is that people have to build their characters before they know for sure what is going to be like useful and required of them in the game. Like I always hate it, like playing like computer games like Baldur's Gate or something like that. I always hate having to make permanent commitments to my character design before I have any idea, like, is lockpicking going to even be in this game? Should I put any points into it, or is that going to be a huge waste of time, and I sometimes wonder if like that session 0 or that session 0.5 could let people immerse themselves in like a kind of an example of the most intense the campaign is going to get, and then might give them a chance to be like, okay, now that I see that, obviously lockpicking is never going to come. Obviously lockpicking is something that actually is going to be in this game, so I'm going to move. I want to redo my character a little bit to shift some points there, or I don't know.
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, it all depends on the system too,
yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah,
the respecking
yeah
idea. But yeah, I like that. I mean, it's almost, I know some GMs will do like the just come with a backup character like right from the beginning, like make your primary and your backup right away. So we have both of them ready to go, and you can quickly swap out for the other one if you're like, oh, actually I don't want to be a rogue. I don't want to roll sneak attack dice all the time.
So hey, we're hitting up on about our time to wrap up.
Yeah,
I have one closing question for you guys, and that is, have either of you guys ever done something really clever to start out the campaign? And maybe clever is overstating this a little bit, but have you ever done something like mailed a physical letter to your players in stationery from the 1920s to or emailed them their top secret orders from the spy agency? Have you done anything kind of a little bit outside of the boundaries of the rules but creative to get people kind of excited about the campaign, or just sort of establish up front like the kind of fun you want to have?
Yeah, the Halloween one shot I ran recently, this just jumped to mind. It's like barely an answer to this, but whenever I was sending out the intro email about scheduling and stuff, I wrote it in character. So like they were playing it was a 90s sitcom, so they were playing an episode of a 90s sitcom. So I wrote the letter as if it was from an assistant producer. To them. So that was a lot of fun to write, and like you could still get across the information to them as like, hey, we're shooting at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. Like all the pertinent information for them was laid out, and that was fun, and it was a pretty low effort way to do that, and I think was more entertaining than just sending them an email saying like, hey, I'll see you at 10.
Yeah, I thought of this with Wizards of the Coast released like sort of a fancy collector's edition box of Curse of Strahd, and one of the several kind of cheesy but fun things in that box is like some postcards from from the land where Strahd lives that I guess you're supposed to like mail to your players, and that just makes me think, like, what if you got out a parchment and you wrote a letter from Strahd, to your players? What if you, I don't know. There's a lot of, you could do fun stuff like that depending on the genre of your game, I think, before you even start playing to like set up the campaign. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that is it is genre dependent. Like you could certainly come up with fancy stationery and invitations for something that has a little bit more of a high society setting to it. Something that is maybe Cthulhu or 1920s premise would have sort of the news clipping feel to it. I can't say that I've done anything particularly involved or creative to start a campaign like that. I did trick my friends into playing Dungeon Crawl Classic a while back. Where
okay, you gotta elaborate here.
But it was just like, hey, does anybody want to come over and play a board game tonight? And then when folks got there, I was like, oh, hey, why don't we play this Dungeon Crawl Classic thing? Here's 3d6 and a stack of 0-level character sheets. Roll them. And yeah, I think for that particular game and doing a 0-level funnel where you're expected to like roll up characters in 2 minutes apiece and have no investment in them and just watch half of them die messily in the first session, we're launching right in. You haven't prepared for this at all, and nor have your characters, because they're all turnip farmers and not adventurers. So you're going into this dungeon exactly as unprepared as they are.
Yeah, that's fun. That's fun and very genre appropriate, I think.
All right. Well, this has been a great discussion. Murph, thank you for coming on. This was fantastic. And now I have a bunch of ideas. I want to start a bunch of campaigns just to try them.
That's the problem with this podcast. I always end these episodes excited about all sorts of new things I can start. All right. Before we go, do we want to quickly add a topic? Murph, this has got to put you on the spot, I realize, but would you like to replace the topic on our table of topics that we just discussed with a new one that some poor, sad, and luckless future guest will have to chat about with us?
Have you had the topic of how do you end a campaign as the opposite of this one?
I don't know if we have.
Not exactly, no. I think that would be a really good one to add to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be really good. Yeah. It's you either get to end it happily or most campaigns it just sort of fizzles and people stop scheduling.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to be, I'll have to admit that that's how it always ends.
Yeah. Okay.
But that could be healthy.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you end unexpectedly but gracefully?
Yeah.
Actually, that is a really good question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
We'll add that to the table.
In.
Thank you.
We'll probably be a two-party. How do you end a campaign? Yeah. Whether it went well or poorly, I think will be the question.
On purpose or otherwise.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you again. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody who's been listening. Yeah, we appreciate it, and we love hearing from you about what you've liked about the show. So thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
I've been Murph, and I was asked to be on this podcast at noon today. So
yes, you did great. You weren't allowed to prep. That's perfect.
That's right,
listeners. That's not true. We plan these months ahead.
Yeah. All right. Well, remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.